Hello there, I'm Kios Ronin Beatmaker, and welcome to Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we're going to discuss the fall of giants. Now, this is going to be a light introduction into this topic, so if this scratches that itch, I highly implore you to go in there, do your own research, and do a little bit of a deep dive, as you might be surprised at you would discover about this world and yourself. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, this article was written April 26, 2020 by Adam Stokes. The fall of the giants and their fate according to ancient texts. Giants were here. In using the term giants, I am referring to persons at least 7 feet tall and up to 13 feet in height. Given that modern day man was significantly shorter than the average we are today, many athletes in modern times are 6.5 or taller. These giants would have certainly seemed of extraordinary stature. The ancient race of giants once existed throughout the world, from China to North America, is a matter attested to not only the written records of various civilizations, but in archaeological records as well. As Jason Gerard and Sarah Farmer note, the vast number of gigantic humanoid skeletal remains excavated in North American region alone makes it statistically highly unlikely for us to interpret all of them as genetic anomalies as mainstream scholars often do. Giants were here. Yet, this observation leads us immediately to another problematic question. If giants as a race or races once existed in antiquity, why do they not exist now? What happened to them? What factors led to their extinction? The archaeological record largely, though not entirely, fails us in answering these questions. This is particularly evident in the work done on giant civilizations in North America. North America archaeologists and anthropologists have done amazing work addressing the unique cultural features of the Hopewell and Adena pre-Columbian peoples who were either themselves giants or direct descendants of previous race of giants. At the same time, North American archaeology is at pains to explain the sudden disappearance of both of these civilizations sometime around 500 AD. Now, I have covered the Hopewell and Adena pre-Columbian peoples. They are on Lounge Ronin. And just look for the playlist that says Giants of Ancient Antiquity. And there you'll have an entire playlist on various topics regarding the giants of North America. And also regarding the fact that the Smithsonian, which is a federal institution, had a department had a department specifically for the recovery and suppression of ancient giant bones recovered throughout North America. Now, I was recently talking with my mom about this and the Bible, and I brought up an article from 1913 from the Associated Press talking about giant bones that were discovered in Arizona, I think it was. The amount of articles that you can find online, you don't even have to go online, just go on to Instagram. If you literally go onto Instagram and type in articles about giants, you will find entire Instagram pages dedicated to cataloging all of these articles. And I'm only saying this so that you guys out there can go out there and do your own research into this. You don't have to take my words for it. You may think I'm talking out my ass. So I'm imploring for you to go out there and do it yourself. And I know many of you have an Instagram channel. So just go on to the Instagram and you'll be surprised at what you uncover just by typing in articles about giants. And like I said, one of them was the Associated Press. You know, I know it's a mainstream publication, but it is still a valid publication, whether or not you agree with their political stance or not. I'm not here for that. But what I'm trying to talk about is that there has been a continuous catalog of these articles and events happening throughout North America for, I guess, now almost 100 years. But, let's continue to the article. All right. In this article, I will propose an alternate anthropological method to determining the fate of the ancient giants. Rather than attempting to interpret the sparse and inconclusive archaeological evidence, I suggest that scholars turn to ancient texts and the mythological religious traditions that contain. As Eric von Daniken notes, ancient literature, while highly mythological, often retains fact at its core. Furthermore, as Van Doniken also points out, many of the narratives contained in ancient texts are themselves far more literal than modern 21st century academics give them credit for. When this material is taken into consideration, it suggests that many of the ancient giant civilizations were violent and oppressive in their culture, and that evidently they were destroyed through their own violent tendencies and actions. Now, this is something that if you hear oftentimes a lot through various stories regarding the ancient giants. I mean, Abraham Lincoln has an entire quote talking about giants and witnessing their bones. And I'm only bringing that up because, there's this wonderful quote I love from Star Wars, and it goes, there's always a bit of truth in legends. And, I always believe, that the same can be applied for us. There's always a bit of truth in mythology. And where do they get these inspirations for mythology? I think it's Graham Hancock, and he talks about this idea that, you know, the idea of them having such creative imaginations at that time seems almost, nonsensical, given how practical and violent their world, from what scientists tell us, it seems to be. So that's something that we need to take into consideration when it comes to mythology. And one of the greatest examples I love to point out is the Iliad, and how we were taught in schools that the Battle of Troy was a story. It was just a mythological story. It was just a fantastical adventure, an action adventure. And then, lo and behold, Greek archaeologists end up discovering a portion of the Wall of Troy. So there you have a prime example of mythology becoming fact. And I think for all of us, that is something that we should take into consideration anytime we delve into our own religious belief systems or cultural mythologies. Let's continue. The description of giants in ancient literature. As Xavier Hayes notes in his recent work, Ancient Giants, tales and stories of giants are a universal phenomenon found in nearly every human culture throughout recorded human history. When these various accounts are examined, one common theme emerges, namely that the giants and the civilizations they created were defined by violence and bloodshed, while a comprehensive examination of giants in ancient oral and written traditions as well beyond the scope of this article. It is possible to narrow our focus here to the treatment of giants within a particular culture and their body of literature. As someone with a background in biblical studies, the ancient Israelites immediately came to mind as the best candidates for such examination. In contrast to many other ancient Near Eastern societies, the history of ancient Israel is very well documented in both biblical, i.e., the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, and extra biblical sources. One of the earliest references to giants is in Israel comes from the Yahwist account of the great deluge found in Genesis chapter 6. The Yahwist being of the four authors or sources for the material in the first five books of the Old Testament, commonly referred to as the Torah or the Pentateuch. The four source theory was popularized in the late 19th century in the work of the famous German biblical scholar Julius Wellhausen. Here they are linked to the sons of God, Hebrew Benim, Elohim, who forcefully take the daughters of men, Banat, Ashim, as wives. The Latin translation of Genesis 6 passage reads, let me get a little sip before I attempt to read ancient Latin. Gigantis autum erant super terram, indibius illis, postquam enim ingris sunt felidae ad filias hominum illiqui gurunt itsis sunt pontius a Sevulio rido famosi. Translation: But giants were all over the earth in those days. For after the sons of God entered into the daughters of men, and these women gave birth, these are the powerful ones from long ago, the famous men. Genesis 6:4. Though the flood account suggests that the giants were exterminated with the vast of the inhabitants of the earth, sans Noah and his family, they appear again much later in biblical timeline in what scholars refer to as the demonomic history. In biblical studies, the demonic history refers to material from Joshua the Kings in the Old Testament. The history begins with Israel's entry into the Promised Land and ends with the destruction of the southern kingdom, Judah, in 586 BC. Within the history is undoubtedly the most famous account of a giant in biblical literature and possibly in Western culture, the violent encounter between the Israelite David and the giant Goliath from Gath. 1 Samuel 17. It should be noted that in both Deuteronomic history and earlier in the Yahweh source, the giants are associated with heightened violence, as the Hebrew term laquanch suggests. They forcibly take, SA, the daughters of men, leading to the birth of hybrid superhuman offspring, with extra biblical tradition identifies with Greek gods and heroes. In the first volume of his Antiquities of the Jews, the first century AD Jewish historian, Joseph links the giants of Genesis to Greek demigods such as Hercules. In later accounts between the giants and Israel, the outcome is always violent, leading to warfare and bloodshed between the two groups. It is in this particular feature of the giants that yields us insight into what may have happened to them, not only in ancient Israel, but throughout the world. The destruction of the giants. We are provided with an explicit account regarding the fate of pre-Diluvian giants in extra biblical literature. In the apocryphal book of Ecclesiastes, in the apocryphal book of Ecclesiasticus, I apologize, included within the Catholic but not the Protestant canon of the Old Testament, we find the following statement. Non exoravant pro peccatis suis antique gigantes qui destructi sunt confidens sua virtuos. The ancient giants who were destroyed for trusting in their own strength were not exonerated for their sins. Ecclesiasticus 16:8. Two things are suggested in this statement. First, that the ancient giants had extraordinary might and power. Secondly, their destruction occurred because they relied too heavily on their power. In biblical terminology, to trust in one's own might has both a religious and secular meaning. In the former context, it refers to neglecting, in the view of biblical authors, the power of God in favor of assuming that one's power and strength are sufficient. In the later context, it is always used in reference to abuse of power, usually through violent physical oppression. Yet the text does not state whether the giants killed each other off or were destroyed by their victims finally rising up against them. More insight into the question of the giants and their final fate can be found in turning to the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. In the Yahweh's flood account of Genesis 6, the author repeatedly notes that because of the giants, the land was filled with violence. Hebrew, Hamas. As noted in Strong's Hebrew Dictionary, the term Hamas is often used in reference to self destructive violence, meaning acts of physical violence directed not just at others, but ultimately towards oneself and one's dealing with members of their own community. Well, that is a little, considering the current climate of the Middle East right now, that's very startling and very eye opening. Wow. Let's continue. In other words, Hamas is a self consuming, almost suicidal type of violence, and it's associated with the giants here suggests that even before the actual flood event, they were in danger of extermination through killing each other off. One could even conclude, based on the use of Hamas in Genesis 6, that the giants were destroyed through some type of civil war. Man, this is freaky to be reading this considering what's going on right now. Trust me, I didn't plan this. This wasn't this wasn't planned. Lounge Ronin just kind of goes with the flow. Such an understanding of the fate of the giants would correspond well with archaeological evidence and oral traditions around the world dealing with giants, particularly in North America. In the Midwestern region of the United States, two pre Columbian civilizations, the Hopewell and the Adena, seem to have mysteriously and quickly disappeared after what archaeologists infer was sudden, massive battle between the two groups. This parallels the type of self destructive violence that is described in relation to the giants in the Old Testament. On the other hand, traditions exist among various Native American tribes of a violent conflict between their ancestors and ancient race of giants in North America. For example, the Peleite Indians refer to an ancient race of hostiles and violent giants known as the Si, the Si Te Ka. As the biblical account, the giants oppressed these ancestors who evidently rose up in revolt against them and exterminated them. Conclusion on the fate of giants. The literal footprints and the remains of civilizations peopled and inhabited by now extinct races of giants are found throughout the world. In this article, I have attempted to provide a possible explanation as to why these giants no longer exist, drawing on traditions and narratives preserved in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible. The biblical text suggests that the giants were not only violent in nature but were destroyed through this self consuming violence. This fate for the giants appears to be supported in archaeological evidence. The seemingly immediate destruction of the Hopewell and Adena peoples, in addition to various Native American oral traditions. When this evidence is taken into consideration, it can perhaps serve as a guide for modern archaeologists and anthropologists who struggle to explain the sudden disappearance of these fascinating, if apparently brutal, gigantic races. And there you have it, a light introduction into the fall of giants. Now, as you can see, the writer of this article, the author, he writes as a matter of fact that giants existed. And I think he does that on purpose, mainly because he wants you to take time and do your own research into looking into these things. And as he brought up the Hopewell and Adena people, and like I've said earlier in this episode, I have covered those articles and I go in depth into them, and we really do a bit of a deep dive. There were multiple different um, humanoid civilizations that were inhabiting Earth. And when we start talking about the deluge, the pre-diluvian civilizations, pre-ice age civilizations, things start getting really kinky, as I like to say. Um, the pyramid of Gong Panang in Indonesia, which is considered one of the oldest, if not the oldest pyramid in the world, because it was built before the last ice age, which means that there was clearly an advanced civilization that was living throughout the world. The oldest gold coin that was found in the Indonesian pyramid, the gold was traced back to Turkey. So I bring these things up because the the fact that there is so much archaeological, anecdotal, and primary sources that can confirm the existence of giants, yet we are still inundated with propaganda and censorship to prevent us from knowing the true history of our world. And that is something that I have been stressing along a lot when we cover these topics in Lounge Ronin, is that we are being uh, suppressed from the true history, the hidden history, for whatever reasons. Mainly, I think because it would then, oops, mainly I think it's because it would completely destroy the fabric and the facade of control these upper echelon of elites and oligarchs and governments and corporations have on us. It would completely collapse, and educational institutions. It would all completely collapse. And I think that is one of the primary reasons why much of this information is either shrouded in mystery, censorship, propaganda, um, humiliation. It's right there in front of you, and we now live in a time where it's getting harder and harder for them to hide the truth because you know they've done such a poor job of instilling any type of generational descendants who can maintain the level of strength that they had in the past. And it's so very apparent. That's why things get desperate and messy. And you see it everywhere around the world now. All the messes that they keep on making, trying to cover up their mistakes and their plans. Excuse me. So, with these light introductions into these topics, it's for listeners out there, for yourselves to, do your individual research, embrace your individuality, question your belief system, question your foundational belief system, I should say. These are important things, especially with the current climate that we're living in, where suppression and censorship and propaganda is at an all-time high. So much so now that it's hard to tell what is real and what is propaganda, because they do such a disturbingly well job of mirroring one another. And that comes especially clear when it comes to ancient history, and whether that is through archaeology, anthropology, you name it. It's been corrupted, it's been manipulated, it's been ostracized. Look at what's going on with Goblepi Tepe right now. They're literally burying it and planting trees over it. Why are they so hell bent on destroying such an important astrological calendar of human history? What are they so much afraid of? You have to start asking yourselves these questions. What are they afraid of? And that is the most important question when it comes to these mysteries of our hidden history, of our hidden past, of the true history, our true past. But it really depends on us as individuals to unite with common goals and common values, to advocate for this information to be released by putting ourselves in those positions of power that care for the individual, that care for our communities, that care for allowing this information to be released so that we can grow and evolve as a human race, so we can become better, so we can learn from our forefathers, from we can learn from the past human civilizations and humanoid civilizations that were advanced beyond our recollection and imagination. But they want us suppressed. They want us within the hive mind. I like to joke that humanity is no different than humanity in Warhammer 40K. We are living in a world where the religion is the institution, the government, and we are stagnated in our advancements in technology. And despite the fact that we seem to be advancing our technology, we are still very cave-like in those technologies. And I would not be surprised if the fall of this version of humanity is because of our violent nature. Perhaps that interbreeding with humans and the giants, we didn't really get the best part of their genes. Violence can be inherited through DNA. Fear can be inherited through DNA. Ideologies. And it seems now more prevalent than ever that that is the case. As Graham Hancock may say, we are a species with amnesia, but our DNA does not forget. And the ancient texts tell us so. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Lounge Ronin. All things, everything. If you've made it this far, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.